Welcome to the Ex Good Girl podcast, the place where people pleasers, perfectionists, and overgivers come to unlearn the good girl rules that you thought were making you good, but now you can see are actually just keeping you small. If you've spent your life being unable to say no, putting everyone else's needs and feelings above your own, constantly seeking external approval, or avoiding conflict to make others feel comfortable, if guilt and resentment feel like a constant weight in your life, it is time to learn to knock that shit off. Every episode, we dive into the stories, skills, and strategies that you need to stop shrinking, start speaking up, and to live a life that is authentically and unapologetically yours, while also deepening the connection and vulnerability in the relationships that matter to you. I'm glad you're here. Let's jump in. Here we go. Marina, I am so thrilled to meet you. I'm a really huge fan of your book. If you're watching the video, you can see that I have meticulously kind of marked it up with a whole bunch of tags because it's such a different book than I have read in a long time. Usually I'm firmly in like the self-help or like romance books when I take a break, but your book, The Vagina Business, really kind of opened my mind up to a different part of the female experience, one that as a 50-year-old woman who's now like firmly in perimenopause, I am finding out just how bereft our medical system, our, testing, advancement, clinical trials are of data that actually helps and supports a healthy female, vibrant experience. And so I was really grateful when I heard you on another podcast and that you would be here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved seeing your copy of the book and seeing all your sticky notes, because that shows me that, you're really engaging with the book. And people will sometimes say to me, I never write into books, I never mark anything, but I've done that with your book. And I always say, that's great. I give you permission, please do, so that you can, come back to it and really engage with it. So feel free to highlight and stick things into it. And I love seeing that.
Well, it's so full of engaging stories and case studies. I actually have looked up 3 different products. I've sent several to friends. There's a whole section about a woman named Cindy Gallup who is behind this Make Love Not Porn. I sent that to my kids. And this book is so full of just not only like really, really useful information, but also kind of the backstory and the lens of misogyny and patriarchy, which is why I wanted to have a discussion with you. And by the way, I really didn't know if you were going to say yes when I emailed you, and I'm just so thrilled that somebody who's like published a book would come and have this conversation. And so if you're out there listening and there's someone that you think is maybe a little out of your reach to talk to, just send them an email, because maybe like Marina, they are generous and gracious with their time and they will end up making some time
Oh,
for you.
that's very kind. I'm so honored. Thank you.
What do you want people to know about you as we begin our conversation?
Yeah. So I'm the author of The Vagina Business. That's the main part. I've been a journalist for a really long time, and I also have a side hustle as an adjunct professor at the NYU Stern School of Business. So I teach business students and I write about a whole range of things as a journalist. I've always liked to focus on women and the female perspective, whether that's in finance or health or in technology. And that's what's brought me to the space I'm covering right now, which is FemTech. And that stands for female technology. Did you know this term before?
I had never heard it. I had never heard it
Hmm.
before.
Yeah, most people haven't heard of it before, but I think it's a really helpful term. And the first thing to say is actually it's not fintech. So people mishear it as financial technology, but this is not about online banking. It's female technology. So that's technology focused on female bodies, anything from periods to fertility, menopause, but also going beyond the uterus to heart health and bone health, and so on. And this term was coined by Ida Tin, the founder of Clue, which is a period app, in 2016. It's also a term that was historically used by Tam brands, which was a big Fortune 500 company that produced tampons. So the term has been around, and in its most recent iteration, it started in the period app space. I think more recently, it's come to include a much wider range of products and services that focus on women's health. They're oftentimes digitally enabled and consumer focused. And the way that I see it is that it goes beyond products and services as well to include uh, research projects. And, it's a really collaborative effort that is trying to move women's health forward. So I see FemTech as a positive, emerging industry, one that's trying to have a positive impact on women's health, as opposed to scam tech. So that's a category of products I identify that tries to monetize our insecurities and vulnerabilities.
Oh, we're going to get into scam tech because I feel like I have fallen prey to some scam tech things during my lifetime. And I think just to kind of set up the conversation, I found myself through the book feeling kind of some of the similar emotions that I have felt as a 50-year-old woman in perimenopause, really struggling to find good information about what was happening to my body and why it was so hard and why for so long my brain fog, my everything from brain fog to having a hard time falling asleep, some of my musculoskeletal aching was just kind of dismissed
Mm-hmm.
by doctors. Um, I I remember taking the transcript of a TikTok video outlining what hormone replacement therapy could do for me to my
Mm-hmm.
doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and I quote, "We don't do that kind of medicine here."
Oh, wow.
And I said, "The type of medicine that takes care of like me, women's bodies?" And he said, "No, no, no, that's this whole HRT thing is it's not something that's been well studied." And so he gave me a whole bunch of essentially bullshit. And I found that that meeting with him to be a turning point because I felt so helpless and so enraged that I didn't have better information. But I think that as we kind of go through a few of the topics I want to discuss with you, there's a good reason for that, right? There are really good reasons why women have been excluded from the medical and health testing and advancements and trials, not least of which, if you didn't know this, dear listener, it wasn't until 1993 that in the United States, women's bodies were mandated to be part of clinical trials and research. So as you researched and kind of came up with what you were going to write about, what did you notice, Marina, about what set up the conditions in which there are so few advancements in health and femtech for women?
There's so much interesting stuff in what you're saying. So, first of all, there are, I think, 34 different symptoms that are related to menopause, and you've absolutely named some of them. HRT has gone through a reevaluation recently in terms of who it can serve. And, people often ask me, is HRT good or bad? And the answer is it's neither. It depends on your personal circumstances and your health history and your health factors and so on. And there's actually a nonprofit called Hormonally that has licensed a really important article from the New York Times about HRT, and they've made it available to everyone. So if you want to read a great article, go to Hormonally. It's on their website. So that's one thing. The other thing to say is that doctors, unfortunately, medical professionals are still not trained in menopause most of the time, both in the US and in the UK. So medical gaslighting and confusion is unfortunately very common. Then the point you've raised about clinical trial is, hugely important in how we got to where we are, because most of our medical understanding is built around the male body, and women and people of color were only included in 1993. So that means we're now trying to backfill all of those gaps, and we're still not at a stage where we've reached parity. So in clinical trials, women are still not there at 50%. And with studies that have included us, they oftentimes still don't disaggregate their results by sex. So even if you've included a more diverse range of people, most of the time, researchers wouldn't look into what that actually means. And one example I often talk about is, if you're trying to picture a person who's having a heart attack, who do you see?
Somebody clutching their chest and, you know, in obvious like physical distress. Maybe they can't talk, they can't breathe.
Yeah, and it's usually an old guy, usually an old
Yeah.
white male. And so he feels pressure on his chest and pain radiating down the left-hand side. And those symptoms are typical for men, but they're not actually typical for women. Women are much more likely to have extreme long-term fatigue and jaw pain. And those symptoms are considered atypical. Even though we're over 50% of the population, so how can that be atypical? But unfortunately, women are 50% more likely to be misdiagnosed after having a heart attack, and we wait longer to seek help. And there are all these negative outcomes that are associated with that. And so that's one of the things that got me into FemTech was when I came across a company called Bloomer Tech that's created a smart bra that can help women who are at risk monitor their heart health. And I thought, oh, that's such a cool idea. That could be part of the puzzle to solving this. And I spoke to the founder, Alicia Chong Rodriguez, and I wanted to write about her. But none of my editors were interested because the topic was seen as a bit niche. But that was before COVID. And then several things changed, and I managed to write the story about the smart bra. And I got invited to chair a panel at this conference that was all about femtech. And I was learning, more and more about my own body as well as learning about technology. And I wanted to really bring all of that knowledge together. And that is what I did in the book. And my other personal motivation was that I knew I wanted to have children soon. And I also knew that 9 in 10 first time mothers experience a birth injury, which is just a mind blowing statistic 9 in 10. And that's something that is oftentimes not talked about. And there are different reasons for that. But one of them is, I think, because women who've already given birth think, oh, you don't want to scare her off if she hasn't given birth. You don't tell her, you don't want to put her off. But I don't really like that attitude. I'd rather know, what my options are so that I can do my research. And, I think knowledge is power. So I was really excited to come across a company called Materna Medical, and they've created a birth dilator that could potentially help us prevent birth injuries. And that I thought was just incredible. It's not on the market yet. It's going through clinical trials right now. But what it does is it pre-stretches the muscles of the vaginal canal in the first stage of labor. So by the time the baby comes through, you're less likely to experience tearing, and you're less likely to have pelvic organ prolapse and so on later down the line. And I thought,
Well,
yeah,
sorry,
go on.
keep
No,
going.
go on.
No, you.
No, you.
I was going to say one of the products that I looked up is actually for the urinary urinary, is that right?
Urinary
Yeah,
incontinence.
urinary incontinence that
Yes.
I am experiencing
Mm-hmm.
now because of a birth injury.
Mm-hmm.
So having had that experience, and so much of this is about the centering of the male, the doctor's experience, because when I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
in labor, I had one of my nurses, she had been a midwife in Jamaica before emigrating to the US and becoming licensed. And she came in and she said, this doctor cuts too soon because he's always in a hurry. So I
Mm-hmm.
want to stretch you. And so she was using
Mm-hmm.
her hands to try and stretch.
Great.
And then he came in and took one look at me, did an episiotomy, and
Mm.
it was so hard to recover from. And so having had that experience, I understand, some of what you're talking about as
Yeah.
being,
Yeah.
this taboo, but also just the centering of the wrong person's experience.
That's right, 100%. I think the doctor's perspective, the hospital culture too often takes precedence over a woman's actual medical needs and personal preferences. And episiotomies are the key example of that because they are overused. And there's a lot of research that shows us natural tearing is preferable to episiotomies because episiotomies are more likely to get infected, takes longer to heal, it's more painful, and it's purely because, as you said, the doctor might be in a hurry. It's a complete scandal. Um, C-sections are also another example. So they can be life-saving, but there's also a lot of research that shows that they're overused, unfortunately, especially in the US, especially in low-risk pregnancies. So that's another example. And, it's a major abdominal surgery, which has both immediate and long-term risks like infection, hemorrhage, problems with your placenta further down the line. Um, the other thing is that in the US, something like 70% of women give birth on their back, when we know that lying on your back in labor is actually what can cause birth injuries. And it's much better to be on all fours or in another active um, birth position. But obviously, it's easier for a healthcare professional to see what's going on if you're lying on your back. So that's
It's,
another example.
I was just shocked when I read that the last major medical innovation for women around birth happened in
It was
1950.
popularized in the 1950s. Yes, exactly.
That's incredible. Why do
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
I was
that,
amazed to learn that when I found out that the epidural was so it was invented a bit earlier than that, over several decades. It was actually not used in birth initially, but then it was popularized in the US in the 1950s and gained more traction in the 60s and 70s. And it's just mind blowing to think that if you go into the hospital right now, this will be offered as the best possible option. And we've had other innovation focused on the fetus, focused on the baby, but when it comes to the mother, why haven't we seen, hundreds of new things like the vaginal dilator that I spoke about, for example?
well, part of that you address in the book in several sections on taboos and
Hmm.
how we still, like so many of the innovators, so many of the product creators that you talk with, they have a lot of experience, a lot of pushback, even just saying the word vagina,
Yeah,
even just using accurate names for female sexual reproductive organs. Um, and then if they can use that word, they're censored in ads, they're censored in on social media, and there's just a lot of pushback, which is so interesting because
yeah.
I'm remembering a conversation I had with my dad about a part of my mom's health. And he said, well, you'll have to talk to her about that because I can't talk to her about anything that is quote unquote down there. And
Mm,
I just thought,
mm,
that sums up so much
mm.
of why we haven't seen those hundreds and hundreds, right? If if there are men in the boardroom who are saying, well, my wife doesn't have that problem, or I can't talk to
Yeah,
that about my
yeah.
wife, or I can't even stomach hearing the word vagina,
Yes, exactly. That's the quote that I have in the book where a VC investor says, I don't want to talk about vaginas in my Monday morning partner meeting. And
right?
so, you know, and that's something I kept hearing again and again from companies that have a vagina-centric innovation is that there's this big stigma and taboo that stands in the way of them raising money. Um, and so that made me really angry. And I wrote this article called We Need to Talk about Investors' Problem with Vaginas. And that article went viral. And Cindy Gallup added me on LinkedIn and messaged me. And lots of people started getting in touch. And so I went from there. And for the book, I went all out. I spoke to over 100 people across 15 countries to find the most interesting innovation because I think innovation can happen anywhere. It doesn't just happen in Silicon Valley, and it can depend on the context as well. But then many things are universal, um, like the birth experience. And I think what's underlying this is that we have normalized female pain, and we tell women to just suck it up, and we say, welcome to being a woman. Instead of coming up with better solutions, we say, oh, you have extreme period pain? Well, that's normal. Pain with breastfeeding? No, just wait a few months. It might get better. Birth? Oh, well, that's meant to be a horrible experience. Um, what else? IUD insertion? Women are either told, oh, no, no, that's not painful at all, or like, oh, but it's worth it. So
You heard,
yeah, go on.
have you heard about the new birth control for men called Adam,
Yes, yes, they are
and
in the
how it's,
book.
oh,
They're
there,
in.
that's okay. That's right. And maybe it was in the book that I read this. They've already been approved, plus pain management for when it's
Yes,
done for the men.
yes, that's right. Yes,
Yeah, IUD
exactly.
insertion, it
Yeah,
can be one of the most painful things for a woman to endure, and there's no pain relief offered.
exactly. And it should be. And, some healthcare professionals are ahead of the curve and they're aware of this and they are offering pain relief, but it should be completely normal. It should come with a whole tray of options. Just like when you go to give birth, there should be a whole tray of options and things to choose from, because every woman is different and, everybody has their preferences.
Yeah. So we've talked about the taboos, right, around women's health, and we've always, and
Mm,
you've also mentioned how female pain is just normalized. The other thing that really struck me in your
mm,
book was how you put into words, specifically in the section about the development of the breast pump, you emphasized a few times that so often we as women are undereducated about what we're actually going through as being a problem. Like breastfeeding doesn't have to hurt. Breast pumping doesn't have to be this awful experience where you're sitting on a bucket in the janitor's closet, right, at work, because there's no place for you to do it in a way that is comfortable and clean. There's I feel like that has happened to me a lot. I'm just so conditioned to believe that
yes.
what is happening to me is part of being a woman, whether it's giving birth or now where I am in perimenopause, that there is what you call this latent need
Mm-hmm.
in the fact that women are just taught to just accept that what is happening to them is necessarily painful because it's what happens to women.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a big issue, and I think there are many ways of explaining how that plays out in healthcare. So one statistic I have in the book is that women make 80% of healthcare decisions. So for our children, our partners, our parents, and so on. And that includes purchasing decisions, but only 4% of research and development focuses on women's health. And something that healthcare professionals will often tell me is that women put themselves last. And so as a result, uh, we might miss health screenings that are important. For example, the other thing is that, and you're an expert on this, that we're brought up to be nice and to be agreeable and to um, please those around us, to make life, easy and comfortable for everyone else. And if that's how you're raised to be and move in the world, is it surprising that women are then less likely to complain about the side effects of medication? I don't think so. I think it's all connected. And female pain is also underestimated. So when we go to the emergency department, we're less likely to be given the kind of pain relief a man would get. Um, but I think it kind of goes both ways in terms of how we express it and also in how it's perceived by society. And I think we spoke about taboos and shame. And shame is so fascinating because it goes so deep and it's everywhere, right? When young women get their period, there's shame. When they don't get their period, there's shame. Like there's shame no matter what side you're
There's,
on.
yeah, there's no winning. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have to distinguish between privacy and shame. So somebody's period can be a private matter, but shame becomes a problem once you're embarrassed to buy period products, or if you're too embarrassed to say vagina at the doctor's office, or if you're too ashamed to breastfeed in public. And shame doesn't serve us, it does the opposite, right? Um, and I think what happens when we don't talk about female bodies and when we shroud them in mystery and in shame is that we inflict more pain onto women and we rob them of pleasure. And the other interesting thing is that shame is interconnected. So I have this study in the book where women who say, I'm embarrassed when I have to buy period products, are also more likely to say, I think pictures of women who are breastfeeding are obscene. And they're also less likely to be able to advocate for their own sexual pleasure. So it's all interconnected.
I love how you make the connection. It's almost like there's a continuum from pain all the way to pleasure, right? And anywhere a woman is on that kind of scale, whether she can't advocate for, I mean, I remember that doctor who gave me the epidural, when the nurse was trying to help me, he accidentally sewed a piece of gauze into the stitches and I
Oh,
didn't know. And so it's days later. And I actually stayed in the hospital because my daughter had a complication. And so they let me stay in the hospital with her. And I remember, kind of feeling around, everything feels different. And I just kept, my fingers were on the gauze and I was like, what is this? And I was embarrassed to
mm,
ask a nurse to come
mm,
in and take a look. And finally, there was just something that made me do it. And then she was saying, oh, the doctor's going to be irritated. And we were literally feeling a piece of gauze that had been sewn into me that had been there for 4 or 5 days by then. And we were both worrying about the feelings of the doctor in
that's
having to come in.
unbelievable. Yeah.
But you talk in the book
Yeah.
about Serena Williams.
Yeah.
And so her experience of almost dying
Mm,
because she was not believed or because her
yeah.
her medical experience was minimized. And so
Yeah.
if you're on the pain side of the
Mm,
spectrum, like there are actual consequences for women when we have bodily shame and can't speak up,
yeah.
all the way over to the pleasure side where our sexual experiences, which are meant to be pleasurable and bonding and whatever we want them to be, are also minimized because of that same shame.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's just incredible to think he will be irritated instead of obviously you're the one who, was right to be irritated and outraged. And um, yeah, that's just unbelievable.
Well, it makes so much sense when you think about the programming that we get about what it means to be a good girl, right? To be
Yeah.
nice. You said it, to be kind, to not rock the boat. And this quote in your book really sums up the rock and the hard place that women are in when it comes to our health. This is what you wrote. Society wants us to look good and is less interested in whether or not we feel good.
Yeah.
What were some of the instances that you saw that kind of prove that true?
Yeah. So in the business world, we're more likely as female entrepreneurs, more likely to raise money in beauty, for example, or in fashion, because that's considered gender congruent, than in tech or in something like condoms, for example, that is a male dominated industry. And so when you have a femtech company, you're dealing both with stigma and you're potentially also operating in a space that's male dominated. It could be medicine, it could be engineering, whatever it is that you're doing. And there are lots of biases that are particular to female investors. Um, I'm just trying to think which one to which one to talk about. But one is that when investors talk to female entrepreneurs, they tend to ask questions about the downsides. So, how will you deal with your competition, and what if something goes wrong? Whereas when they talk to male investors, they tend to say, what's your vision and what would happen in the best case? And so that's a very clear bias um, that female entrepreneurs encounter. And consumers also replicate certain biases. So as consumers, we tend to see it very favorably if a group of guys sells cupcakes, for example, but when a group of women makes craft beer, people tend to be a bit turned off or suspicious.
Right. Yeah, they're like, what do women know about beer? What could women possibly contribute to this space?
Yeah, exactly. But it's beer, it's cupcakes we're talking about here. How can that be so gendered? And in terms of looking good and feeling well, I think we're constantly told by society, that something is wrong with our hair, our bodies, our clothes. And if you spend all of your time and money and energy worrying about those things, right? You're less likely to have the time and money and energy to take on the world, to change things, to start a business, and so on. So yeah, it goes deep.
I think that's exactly it. That if women really were able to have the time and energy and effort to find who they are and what they want to do and be in the world, it would look radically different. But because of the type of programming that we all grew up with and swim in every day, it just makes us ripe for falling prey to what you call scam tech, right?
Hmm.
Things that focus on our outside appearance without really doing much for us medically or in terms of our health, or actively causing harm.
Yeah,
Tell me a little bit about scam tech.
yeah. Absolutely. So scam tech monetizes our insecurities or our vulnerabilities. And I think there are several different categories of scam tech. The first one is stuff that's unnecessary. So FemFresh, for example, I looked it up in Walmart just earlier, and the way they describe it is it's private parts wash for women. Great word, private parts. But there's no such thing as dude fresh or dick fresh, right? And that's because in reality, both of those things are unnecessary. Then there are products that are actively damaging. So like vaginal steaming or vaginal douching, those can actually cause real harm, like adverse pregnancy outcomes or BV and so on. And then there's a category of products that falls into the pink tax category. Um, and when we think about the pink tax, we usually think about razors. So, razors that are blue and sold to men are typically cheaper than razors that are pink and sold to women. And I've seen that same trend in healthcare. It's just that things they get rebranded as well. So I think of it as the pink rebrand. We have ibuprofen, for example, as being repackaged as pain medication for periods, but it's the same underlying. Do you call it Tylenol here? I think
Yeah.
Tylenol rather than ibuprofen. Um,
No,
so
we
in
we
the
we we have ibuprofen, but what you're saying I think is right. Midol, which
Yes,
is
Midol,
a
exactly.
pink pill.
Yes.
Yep, keep
Yeah,
going.
yeah. So we have Feminax, and I think Midol is the same thing. So it's the same thing as the generic medication, but it's been rebranded to be applied to period pain, and it's more expensive. And the same happens with TENS machines. So you can buy a really inexpensive TENS machine online, which uses electrical current, for a labor pain, for example, or period pain, or you can buy a product that has taken a normal TENS machine, made it pink, repackaged it in some way, and it's 2 or 3 times as expensive, and it's marketed to be used for period pain. And I think the interesting question with that is, well, if medical professionals don't tell you to use pain relief or TENS machines, then maybe these companies have a point in that they raise awareness that certain generic products can be used for period pain or for something else. But I think we'd have to ask, how much of a premium can they charge for doing that? If it's a 10% premium, that's probably fine. But if it's a 300% premium, then uh, then it's a ripoff and a pink tax / rebrand. And then when you look at something like, let's say, a period app, things are more nuanced. Is it femtech or is it scamtech? And I think that will depend on the individual app. Right now, there are over 300 period apps on the market, and they vary massively. It really depends on the company that's behind it. So some companies like Clue, for example, have put a lot of thought into their period apps. Other companies, gaming companies, utility companies, have just put out period apps because they saw there's an opportunity to put some ads onto it or whatever, but they haven't actually thought about the product in and of itself. So when you're choosing a period app, period tracker, for example, I think it's important to look into the data policy. So if they're asking to access your camera or your microphone, that's an immediate red flag, an immediate no. If they don't have a privacy policy, that's again an immediate no. It's also important to look at whether they're evidence-based. So what do I mean by that? Some apps will only look at a 28-day menstrual cycle, but we know that only 13% of women have a 28-day cycle. So ideally, the app would adjust to whatever your cycle is like. And the other thing to look at is how a product is regulated. Is it just a consumer device? Is it a medical device? And with period apps, the question is, what does it claim to do? So is it just about keeping an eye on when your next period is coming? Is it offering to help you conceive? Or is it offering to be a digital contraceptive? And each claim is stronger than the previous one, right? If
That's
you
so,
got your
yeah.
period date slightly wrong, well, whatever, might be a bit annoying if you're on holiday or something, but it's not the same as trying to use it as a contraceptive. And so there are only two apps that are currently approved as digital contraceptives, and that's Natural Cycles and Clue. That's something to be aware of.
You have a series of questions that you ask in the section on Scam Tech that I thought were so good. I'm just going to repeat them here because it is really important that as consumers, we be as educated and savvy as possible so that we are putting our money into the types of products that actually make a difference and make women's lives better, advance female health, and then not into the products that seek to, like as you said, just kind of monetize all of our insecurities. So here are the questions. Number one, does this product monetize shame? Love it. Does it imply that your body is dirty? Does it sell the idea that beauty is pain? Is it actively harmful in some way? I think about beauty products that burn or that and some of the cosmetic procedures, filler or things that harden and cause other issues in the faces and bodies of women who use them. Is it underregulated for what it is?
Yeah.
Does it hide what kind of data it collects? Does it make outrageous claims? Does it fall into the category of potions and lotions? Does it trigger anxiety? I think those are all really, really important questions to keep in mind, because most of the people listening to this podcast are not going to, I hope some of them are engineers and women who might, take a chance in this femtech space, but most of us are going to be consumers.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important to pay attention to the kinds of emotions something triggers as well. If it triggers fear, then it's important to pause and just really look into what it is that you're being advertised. And I always recommend that people Google the name of the product plus another word like scandal, court case, data privacy, and so on. And then you can see news stories and other things that come up in relation to that.
Is there anything else that you would advise for women who are going to be consuming? Because if we are the ones, and I believe you, I know it's true of our household, that we are making 80% of the decisions about where household money goes. Any other advice you would have for women as we try to become the savvy consumers of these products that make our health better?
Yeah. I think what's interesting is that a gap has opened up between our experiences and how the healthcare system works. And so, who is stepping into that gap? And it's both good actors and bad actors. And unfortunately, the bad actors will oftentimes use the same language that the good actors use, and they will claim that they're evidence based or doctor approved or whatever. So, you just have to be aware that that's not necessarily the case. And it may only take a Google search to find out if something, is actually evidence-based or recommended by the main organizations. So you could, to your Google search, you could add WHO or ACOG or one of the other big health-focused organizations in your space, because unfortunately there is a lot of misinformation, especially when it comes to supplements. There are lots of supplements that claim to be able to do things, but there's no evidence behind them. There is lots of misinformation on TikTok around how to conceive as well. There are social media accounts that claim they can help you reverse PCOS naturally, which is not possible.
Mm.
Um, Lots of false claims around abortion, of course. So that's definitely something to be aware of.
I'd like to also add that because of we're recording this on, Monday, March 3rd, 2025. In the United States right now, the political climate is particularly harsh toward women and women being included specifically by gender in medical trials. The latest executive order slashed funding from the NIH. And so another thing that I would encourage women, especially in the United States, to do is to call your senators and representatives and ask them to reinstate. It falls under DEI for reasons which I don't know and can't explain, but specifically asking them to include women by gender in studies is so essential, because women are not small men, as Dr. Stacy Sims says. Our bodies are different. And so if we want true medical advancement that looks and feels good for us in our bodies, that actually helps us be healthier, we have to be included in CDC, in NIH medical trials by gender.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to add as we wrap up our conversation here? Anything that you haven't gotten to say, or a particular part of the book that you want to make sure people know about?
Yeah. I think this could be an interesting thing to say as well. Um, because it's something I'm encountering again and again and again. I have the word vagina on the cover of my book. And and so that has proven to be a bit of a challenge. When I came up with the title for the book, several publishers said to me, "This is a brilliant book, but are you sure about the title?" And I was asked to come up with 16 alternative titles at one point. Yeah,
Oh my gosh, that is
yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah, yeah. I was in a panic. I called two of my best friends and I said, "Okay, go." And we came up with 16 alternative titles. And then all of these titles were tested on my target audience. And guess which title won? The Vagina Business.
Well, okay. If you go out and get this book, I plan to keep it on my bookshelf, but I'm actually going to take the cover off, because if you take the cover off, it's this gorgeous, like hot pink, and then vagina just like jumps out at you. I love that you named it The Vagina Business, because I think there is a whole kind of latent desire out there among women to just be seen, to call things what they are, to dismiss the taboo and the shame-filled programming that we have around everything. I mean, I remember when I started my period, my mom teaching me how to wrap up the tampon or the pad in so much toilet paper, because what she said was, quote, "You don't want anyone to know what it is." And I think there are so many of us who are we're done living that way. We're done with euphemisms. We're done with things that focus on the way we look and not the way we feel. And so your book is just such an important addition to that. And I hope that it makes a huge difference. It has made a huge difference for me in the way I look at these products. And I hope it really is as changing worldwide as it has been for me.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to hear that. Because the title does continue to be an obstacle. You know, I was told some bookshelves may not display it or promote it, and I've been turned down by a venue and by another author when I ask for a blurb and so on. But at the same time, it's exactly as you say, women are tired of euphemisms, and I get the most powerful messages from readers saying, this book is my weapon and I carry it with me on the train. And lots of people have actually told me they've taken it onto a plane with them as well, or that it's changed their career in some way, or that it's one of their most prized possessions. And to hear that feedback is just very, very powerful. Or that it's changed the way they talk to their daughter. It's inspired them to have a conversation with their mother. So I think it was all worth it in keeping that title, because it's also what oftentimes intrigues people and attracts people to the book in the first place.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so grateful for your time today. You're going to be speaking in just a couple days at South by Southwest in Austin. I'm going to link to that. You also have a newsletter that you send out, to which I've subscribed. Really looking forward to that. And then I will put a link to the Vagina Business in the show notes today. Marina, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me and for all of your thoughtful questions and comments.
Hey, thanks for listening. If this podcast has been helpful to you, I would really appreciate it if you would give me a 5-star rating in whatever platform you listen to your podcasts. And if you go to my website, sarahfisk.coach, you can sign up there to receive my emails. Right now, I'm taking private one-to-one clients who want my help speeding up this work in their own lives. I really hope to provide a lot of free information on my website and in my podcast for people to do this work on their own. But if you're interested in having a coach like me to help you implement these things faster, to find the blind spots and obstacles that you're not aware of, go to my website and sign up for a consult. That's a time when you and I can get on Zoom and talk about the particulars of your situation, and I can show you how I could be helpful. The second thing you can do on my website is sign up for a freebie that I have called Difficult Conversations. Having a conversation that seems like it's going to be hard or difficult is one of the things that people pleasers struggle with. And so I've created a whole guide for you to be able to do that with some more confidence. That will also get you signed up for information about my group program, Stop People Pleasing. It's a group coaching program where you join a community of women just like you who are struggling to overcome perfectionating and people pleasing, and we do it together in a group. It's a really amazing opportunity to not just learn from your own experience, but just to see how similar you are to so many other women out there. The healing and the challenging and the laughing and the growth that happens in that beautiful community of women is really amazing. And if it's interesting to you, I would love for you to know about it.